Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Story number 1. Telling this story is incredibly difficult for me, not necessarily because I myself am afraid for my safety, but for the safety of my child. To a parent, there's nothing more terrifying than the thought of your child being hurt and you not being able to do anything about it. Grace was born October 15th. My wife's pregnancy had been a constant battle with complications throughout. Fast forward 9 months to the delivery room. My wife, Marlene, was in labor and the monitors showing the baby's vitals were not looking good. I was a nervous wreck. The baby's heart seemed like it would stop for brief periods of time and then resume at an incredible speed. After a long and tumultuous labor, Grace was born. Shortly after being born, her heart stopped, and the doctors and nurses flew into action. They revived her, not once, but twice. After all of this, Grace is still alive and beautiful and developing normally. The delivery and pregnancy had made my wife and I overly protective of her. My wife is a nurse who works 12-hour night shifts, going in at 7 p.m., leaving me with Layla for the evening. We have good father-daughter time, watching kids' TV shows and listening to music. Not that I don't like my wife being home when she is off work. I just really enjoy being with my little miracle girl. Grace's room is down the hall from our room. Our house is very small, so with a single jump we could go from our room to hers. On the opposite end of the hall is my hobby room, where I draw and write. When Grace is in her crib, she has a baby monitor right by the table, directly across from where her head lays, with a microphone pointing right at her. I keep the other monitor with me at all times, turned up loud enough to possibly be considered a Sydney Ordinance noise violation. Sometimes, though, it will pick up other frequencies, such as passing truckers and radio stations. I was sitting in my study, furiously drawing for the graphic novel I had been working on for a while, when the radio chattered. I had grown accustomed to this, and could block out the white noise. But when a word would come through, I instantly picked up on it. So pretty, such a pretty girl. It was clear as a bell, like someone was speaking right into the monitor. It was a man's voice. I didn't know what to think. Instinctively, I went to check on my daughter. She was in her crib, just as I had left her. I watched her breathe for a few minutes just to be sure she was okay. She was. She twitched a little, and that eased my anxiety a good bit. I passed off the voice as a signal from a radio station or the local TV station, and returned to my study, satisfied that my little girl was safe. About an hour later, the monitor crackled again. After the last incident, I immediately went to her room, even though I didn't hear anything else. I peeked my head in to see her still breathing, still asleep. Another little twitch from her arm was enough proof for me that she was all right. Back to my study I went. As I sat down, the monitor crackled again. "You're a pretty little girl, aren't you?" Yes, you are." Perfectly clear. What the fuck? I shot up out of my chair and bolted down the hall. I slowed just enough to make the corner to face Grace's crib. She was awake and had rolled over on her back. She was perfectly fine. I leaned over her crib and she smiled and cooed at me. Relieved and seeing that she was awake, I decided to take her out of the crib. I picked her up, changed her diaper, made sure I turned off the monitor, and went back into my study and put her down on her playmat. The monitor crackled again, but I paid no attention to it. It was about 9 o'clock in the evening when she dozed off on her mat. I was going to finish the current frame I was working on illustrating and then take her to bed and go to bed myself. "Where is she?" Again, perfectly clear, almost concerned sounding. I froze. Where is the girl? The voice was raspy and more aggressive, like a hiss. I was nearly paralyzed with fear, but I grabbed Layla off the floor and shut and locked the door. I held her, and she started crying from me picking her up so quickly. It must have scared her. My heart was pounding. Through my chest, my blood ran cold. Ha ha ha. The voice on the monitor chuckled maliciously. Oh, I hear that sweet little girl. I'm coming to get her. I backed myself and Grace into the corner. I picked up a metal calligraphy pen and held them in reverse grip in case whatever it was that wanted my child came through the door. In the hallway outside, it sounded like there was wind blowing, but I knew all the windows were closed and locked because my wife had allergies and we never opened them. In fact, a few were even caulked shut. I clutched Grace close to me, praying that whatever it was would not find us in our small, obvious hiding spot, and that Grace would stop crying. Footsteps came down the hall. They sounded heavy, like boots, but they had a harder, more metallic or rocky sound. I pressed Grace into me, and the monitor crackled again, and the voice, now sounding pure evil, said, I'll find that little girl, and when I do, I'm going to take her. The footsteps were closing in on our locked door. I sank down to the floor, completely washed out with fear now, ultimately waiting for whatever it was to come and find us and kill me, because I knew if push came to shove, who or whatever it was would have to kill me before I let it have my child. The lights dimmed and hummed like some outside power source was draining the power from our house. There was a long scratching sound, like the sound of a knife being scraped down the wall, separating us from the hallway. The footsteps were about to my bedroom now, and they stopped. Are you in here? The voice spoke over the monitors, somewhat pleasantly. No? Well, I'll just keep looking. At this point, I was not even sure if I was breathing. I can hear you, said the voice on the monitor in a most wicked tone. Then Grace began laughing, for whatever reason I do not know. Oh, someone sounds happy. I tried to quiet Grace down, but she kept laughing louder and louder. I knew that there was no way whoever it was out there would not find us now. I decided to act preemptively. I put Grace down in the corner and gripped my makeshift weapon tightly. I would fight whoever was in my home to the death to protect my little girl. I quietly unlocked the door, listening to the sound of the footsteps as they approached. They were loud, very close. I would wait until they were right outside the door and then spring into action and hopefully taken by surprise. I put my hand on the door. It felt incredibly cold and then became incredibly hot in my hand, feeling like it was burning me. I don't know if that was just adrenaline or what, but I kept my focus. Clomp, clomp, clomp. I took one last deep breath and one last look at my daughter in the corner, said a silent prayer and opened the door ready to strike the invader. Nothing. Momentarily relieved, I looked up and down the hallway and saw nothing. No footprints, no scratches on the wall, no strange smells. Everything was completely normal. I pulled the door shut with Grace in the room and swept through the house. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I doubted my sanity. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I delirious? The hallway was lit only by the light in Grace's room at the end of the hall. I turned on the main light and saw nothing. I went through the kitchen, living room, and guest room. Nothing there either. I returned to the study and to my daughter. I picked Grace up and held her tight. She cooed softly, and once more the voice came over the monitor. You're brave to think you could challenge me. I'll leave you alone for now, but I'll be watching her. I'll always be watching her. I'll come for her when you least expect it. Just like I did now. I'll be back. Oh, you'll see. And I'll take that little girl and I will do things you can't even imagine to her. You can't protect your little girl forever. I'll get her. Just wait. I'll get her. And with that, the monitor fell silent. I packed an overnight bag for Grace and myself and went to my in-laws' house for the night. To this day, there have been no more encounters with that voice. I told my wife about it. She's very skeptical. She thinks that some people had just been fooling around with a handheld radio freaking me out, and that I had imagined the footsteps and the scratching sound. It doesn't matter. I know what I heard. I'm keeping my guard up. I don't know how, but I'll protect my daughter at all costs. Nothing will harm her as long as I am alive. Story number 2. When I was 10, I played a late-night game of flashlight tag with a bunch of neighborhood kids. If you don't know what flashlight tag is, it's the same as tag, but you play it in the dark. The person who's it gets a flashlight, and they have to yell the name of the person they see with it in order to tag them. It was really cloudy that night, and most people had their curtains drawn, so it was a perfect level of darkness for hiding in. The side of the street my house was on was skirted by a broad length of woods. That was basically a boundary for our side of the game. You could run through any yard, even go across the street and run through their yards, but you weren't allowed to hide in the woods because it was too difficult to find anyone in there, and it was very easy to trip over tree limbs or end up with poison oak. Of course, this rule was frequently and flagrantly ignored when people got too close to being caught. They dug off into the bushes for a few seconds or run behind a group of trees to evade capture. I don't remember who was it at the time, but I was hiding in a backyard 2 houses down from my house. The family that lived there had a little playhouse for their daughter, a swing set, and a doghouse, but no dog. I would periodically duck into the doghouse whenever I saw the flashlight searching beam approaching. Those of us trying to hide from the it person like to spook each other in the dark by jumping out of nowhere and making each other scream, giving away our positions. I thought I knew where the it guy was, but I got comfortable hanging out on the swing set. Suddenly a person with a flashlight came around the corner of the house and angled it almost directly at me. I jumped and ran for the edge of the woods. When I got there, I hovered in case they saw me and were going to yell at me for cheating. The beam of light seemed to explore the swing set where I was, then came in my direction, but there was no sense of hurry at all to it, and I wondered for a second if maybe I'd attracted the attention of the homeowner. Most people on the block knew we were out playing flashlight tag, but you never can be sure that someone won't get nervous if you stay in their yard too long, so I crouched down in the grass and waited to see who it was. They shined a light right in my face, and I tried to cover it with my hand to avoid identification. The creepy thing was, they never said anything, just shined that light on me. "You got me," I exclaimed, hoping that if it was a homeowner, they'd realize I thought they were the flashlight tagger. Then I realized that 2 houses down, people were yelling, and there was the it guy's flashlight being chasing them around. I stood up and tried to see who was shining a light on me. They just stood there, not moving, not saying anything. I felt a little freaked out. "If you don't want us playing in your yard, I'll go tell them it's off limits, okay?" The person started walking towards me. I didn't feel right, so I started walking towards the edge of the yard. The person just kept shining the light on me and coming toward me. So I ran. When I looked back, the person with a flashlight was running too, and they were an adult, much bigger and much faster than me. I felt scared now, not sure why this person was chasing me. I was running toward where the other kids had been, but they were gone now. It just seemed to be me and the person with a flashlight, so I turned right and ducked into the woods. I dropped to the ground, shaking bushes and stuff to try to confuse the person, then shimmied under a ring of thick bushes and curled up. I could see the flashlight in the woods with me, looking around. I could hear the person's footsteps breaking sticks and crunching on pine needles. I didn't know what the fuck was going on, and I just wanted to get back to all the other kids. Eventually the flashlight wandered deeper into the woods, and I crawled quiet as a mouse back to the edge of the trees, and then got up and ran toward the street. I was immediately caught by the person who was it, but I didn't care. He yelled loud that I was not it, and I tried to tell him that there was someone else with a flashlight wandering around in the woods, but he took off into the dark yelling about no tag backs. "Don't go in the woods," I yelled, but nobody responded. Of course, Any who heard me would just assume I was talking about not cheating at the game, but I was sincerely worried about that person wandering around in them. Of course, now I had a flashlight of my own, so I thought I should go and see if I can find out who that was, just to make myself feel better. I went back behind the house I'd come from, and a bunch of laughing shadows scampered out of sight into neighboring yards. I ignored them and headed straight for the trees. I couldn't see any other light in there, so I thought. Maybe he went home. I didn't know if it was a man or a woman, but I didn't imagine any woman trudging through the woods at night. So I went about playing the game again, albeit anxious because of the lingering thought that there was someone wandering in the woods who didn't seem to be playing the game with us. I ran across the street and chased people to the backyards there, but after a while I found the lots empty and realized that they must have gone back across the street. I ran back over and was exploring the Beach's backyard. Mrs. Beach had a clothesline with a bunch of drying sheets on it, and her daughter Charlotte liked to hide among the linens and stay close to home in case she got too scared of the dark. She was only a year younger than me. I thought I heard something at the tree line, so I went over and was waving the flashlight around into the woods. "Stay out of the woods," I remember yelling. I waved the flashlight back and forth a couple more passes, then saw someone off in the distance. I held the light on whoever it was. They were about half a job into the woods, hard to make out, but it looked to me like Charlotte. Charlotte had brown hair that her mother insisted on keeping shoulder length. We always dressed dark for flashlight tag, and Charlotte liked to wear this deep purple sweatshirt, so it was usually easy to tell when you had found her. "Charlotte, I see you," I yelled. She just stood there. I continued to hold the light on her and call her name, but she didn't seem to move. She stood there, partially obscured by a tree, and looked at me. The distance between us was enough that I couldn't see if she was blinking or not, but she had her head propped at an angle like she was looking around the trunk at me, with her mouth hanging slightly open. Every now and then she sort of twitched or squirmed. It was a real freaky kind of movement. "Charlotte, come out of there," I yelled. "Everybody, Charlotte's it, but she won't come out of the woods." Some kids, including my friend Dustin, appeared behind me and started joining in my yell for Charlotte to come out. "Do you see her?" I asked. "Yeah, she's over behind that tree." "Charlotte, get over here," Dustin said, but she wouldn't come. "Charlotte, are you okay? Get over here, dummy." Charlotte seemed to stand up straighter and then disappear behind the tree. We could hear movement, but it seemed to be going away rather than toward us. Dustin started shouting Charlotte's name again and trudging into the woods after her, but I grabbed him and gave him the flashlight to take with him. I was scared again because this all seemed surreal. I went to Charlotte's house and knocked until her father answered. "Mr. Beach, Charlotte won't come out of the woods, and I'm worried about her," I told him. I wasn't sure if he'd take me seriously, but he rolled up his newspaper and disappeared into the closet behind the door for a moment before returning with a huge flashlight strapped to a car battery. "Show me where she is," he told me, so I led him to the woods and pointed to where I'd seen her. "She was right there," I said, "by a tree. But she wouldn't come out, and she was acting like she was sick or something." A bunch of the other kids kept calling Charlotte, Charlotte, and I could see Dustin's flashlight beam moving around through the trees. Mr. Beach went in after him. They explored the woods for a good 15 to 20 minutes, and Mr. Beach started getting real angry. We could hear him yelling very loudly for Charlotte, threatening her with all sorts of punishments if she didn't get her ass back in the yard that instant. The game was over by now, and we kids just stood there in the Beach's backyard among the linens and watched. Dustin came running back out of the bushes with a dead flashlight. Eventually, Mr. Beach came back out of the woods. "Game over, kids," he said. "Get inside. Ask your folks if they can help me and to bring flashlights." We all ran back home. My dad went out with 3 different flashlights. My mother went and turned on all the lights in the back rooms and opened the curtains and shades to help illuminate the backyard. I sat on the couch all upset, and she eventually came back and hugged me and sat with me while I told her about the person with a flashlight chasing me and how I thought maybe Charlotte had run into him. Mr. Beach had gone inside and called him to report a missing child. They brought huge lights and did a march through the woods, checking very thoroughly, but didn't find her. My mother told my dad what I told her. He told an officer, and I ended up giving a statement. They went to the house 3 doors down and knocked, but the folks that lived there had been asleep and didn't know who would have been in their backyard. The police asked all up and down the neighborhood, but nobody claimed to know anything. The other end of the woods came to a back road mainly used by logging trucks. They found Charlotte 2 days later on the other side of the logging road, down an embankment that ended at a stream, stuffed into a drain pipe. Her neck had been broken and she was apparently stabbed multiple times afterward. My parents wouldn't tell me about it. They thought it would upset me, but Dustin told me all the details at school the next day. It was the most awful thing our town had ever had happen. The police blocked off the logging road and spent months tracking down loggers and truckers who frequently used it. There was a curfew for months, and we were told not to play flashlight tag anymore. We didn't argue. What leaves me shaking to this day is a memory of Charlotte's face hanging out from behind the tree, looking at me. Sometimes I wonder if at that moment I've been witnessing her death, and I wonder if that had almost been me. Story number 3. It's taken me well over a year to gather the courage to talk about this openly. I can't help but feel responsible, and you'll understand why soon. It was a late night in October when the sky collapsed over my town. The clouds that had descended blanketed themselves over my small suburban neighborhood and a nearby highway. The fog was so dense that looking out of the window yielded nearly the same results as staring directly at a blank piece of paper. That night, I remember hearing the weather sirens sounding off, echoing out their unearthly chortle across the empty streets surrounding my home. I ignored them at first, choosing to instead continue my ritual of watching my nighttime sitcoms. That, however, ended soon after the first siren went off. The flickering imagery on my much-too-old television broke apart, exposing warnings of low visibility and severe lightning in my sitcom's place. I watched and listened as the television seemed to join the call of the sirens outside, letting loose their bleeps and emergency tones. The signal warned us to stay inside and to avoid driving for our safety and the safety of others. I let out a quick huff in distaste as my nightly routine was interrupted. I set my eyes on a radio and decided to give it a quick try. Anything would be better than sitting in silence. Unfortunately, that thought was wrong. As I wandered towards my radio and flicked it to life, the only noises that escaped were robotic and emotionless warnings from the National Weather Service. I felt my shoulders shrug in defeat. If this had been a tornado or hailstorm, I'd have appreciated the heads up. I could prep for the storm, but there was nothing I could do about a fog. From there, I let my eyes wander over to the far too bright mist sweeping across what should be the naturally dark streets. I let out a sigh and broke my gaze before heading over to my kitchen, deciding that maybe some hot chocolate would relax me enough to doze off and allow my dreams to take me away from this strange but boring evening. But as I was stirring in the hot chocolate mix into the steaming milk, an idea hit me. I had an old CB radio locked up in my attic. I might not be able to watch my shows or listen to my radio, but maybe if I was lucky enough, some trucker would be stopped on the highway and be willing to have a chat with me. I knew it was a bit of a long shot. CB radios were very rapidly going out of style for truckers, but I knew a few still had them for emergencies or idle chatter. I left the kitchen with my hot chocolate in hand and crept up to my attic steps. I blew softly on the steam rising from my cup as I made the journey to my chest of goodies from yesteryear. I lurched the old chest open and began to set up my little communications area. I even pulled up an old dusty table I had stored away for parties and placed all my needed equipment on top of it. After a few minutes, I was all ready to go. I took a small sip of my drink and turned the radio on. I listened as the age cracked through the speakers. I had hoped the radio had survived a prolonged stay in storage, and luckily, besides from the faint crackles, it seemed rather functional. I keyed the mic and called out through the fog, hopefully to anyone as idle and bored as myself. Calling out to anyone stuck out in that fog. Is anyone out there? I listened as the static of the radio faded in and out nearly silently. Then a sputter of white noise came across the net before an old man's voice came in relatively clearly. Thank goodness someone's out there. I'm losing my mind out here. Can I get a radio check? His elderly voice was gruff and hoarse, the type of voice you'd expect from someone who'd spent a lifetime on the road. I let my lips curl up into a smile. I really didn't expect a reply. You're coming in clear. How about me? I asked, making sure he could hear my end of the conversation. A little broken, but audible. This shit weather came out of nowhere, he grumbled. I imagined him leaned back in his seat, arms crossed with a radio dug into one hand. I could practically envision his windows completely smothered by the fog, isolated from everything. Yeah, I didn't see anything on the television until after the fog hit. All the stations are playing that emergency frequency. I waited for a few seconds for his response. So, you're holed up inside your home then? I thought you might be on the road like me. I heard a slightly disappointed groan from his end. Did you at least go to see the clouds fall? I paused for a moment. I'd been watching my shows oblivious to the weather outside until the warnings. I didn't have the privilege to see it roll into the neighborhood. That's affirm. I'm at my place right now. No, I didn't get to see it hit. A brief chuckle and wheeze came over the radio. You missed out. Craziest thing I've ever seen. It was almost like the clouds hit a cliff midair and fell straight down. They came hard enough that I was actually worried they'd beat my truck up. His voice trailed off slightly in thought. I managed to park on the side of the road, didn't see anyone else near me. Well, damn, sorry I missed it then, I replied, my smile escaping through my voice. Yeah, well, maybe some kid got it on tape. Static interrupted him, squealing loudly out of the speakers. I jumped back slightly, reaching for my ears. His voice fought through it. The fuck was that? Everything all right? I radio in. Yeah, I think so. I think I just saw a car zip by. Some sort of weird black light on it. He gave a dismissive tisk. I know damn well they can't see anything in this fog. Hell, I couldn't see anything but their dumb light going off. I leaned in closer to the radio thinking of an explanation, but came up empty-handed. Some people just have a death wish, I guess. I shrugged. Damn stupid if you ask me. I'd say they only care about themselves, but if that was true, they'd be parked on the side of the road like me. He gave another wheezy laugh, ending in a coughing fit. Getting a little curious, I started asking him some questions. Any chance you can make anything else out there? They said there's some bad lightning in the area, but I haven't seen or heard anything like that yet. Nah, not a damn thing. Haven't heard any thunder either. Besides you, it's quiet as a grave out here. This fog doesn't even look like it's moving, and I sure as hell don't hear any wind hitting my truck. I bit my lip trying to concentrate on any noises outside. Being in my attic, I should be able to hear the wind sweeping its way through the wooden boards of my house, but he was right, there was none. This is the weirdest storm I've ever seen. To be honest, wait, no. The lights are back, he interrupted himself. I could hear his voice strain as his focus shifted outside of his truck. They don't look right. They aren't on the road. His voice slowly trailed off. What do you mean? Where are you? I asked, hoping everything was all right. That's not right. Shit. The only thing on that side of the road is a tree line. No way in hell a car could squeeze through there. The lights look too high off the ground, too. They're a little higher than my eye level, and I'm in goddamn semi. Hey, just keep your eyes on and let me know if you're all right. You'll be okay. I could hear him swallow hard. They're gone. They zipped away again. Actually, fuck me. They didn't just zip away. They looked like they ran away. I swear they goddamn crouched and sprinted off. Static consumed his transmission again, but nowhere near as badly as before. It's just some lights. Maybe someone's got flares out there. Could be some hunters trying to find their way back home in this fog. I tried sounding reasonable. I figured there must be some sort of rational explanation. Yeah, that's got to be it. The fog must be screwing with my depth perception. I can't see anything out there. So I think I'm good. I heard faint noises coming from the radio just behind his voice. It didn't sound like someone trying to make contact with us through the radio. Rather, it sounded like something that happened to be captured while the old trucker was talking. Is there someone with you? I asked. I tried to sound unconcerned, as if it was a normal question to ask. Negative, just me. He sounded a bit put off, like he knew something was wrong. I could tell. He was on edge. I just wanted to know if you were alone or not, just to see if you had an extra set of eyes and ears out there. Oh no, it's just me out here. There was a brief pause followed by another explosion of static. He eventually radioed back. All right, I'm done. Something just slammed into my trailer. I heard a loud metallic crash explode from my speakers, followed by yelling. That ain't no hunter. It's rocking my damn truck. His voice sounded frightened. Static kept pulsating through the radio. Do you need me to call the police? I asked, worried about the safety of my new friend. No, I'm already dialed in and just got put on hold. I was going to hold off a bit on making noise and hope it goes away. If this is some sort of bear, then it's a record holder. I left the radio alone for a little while, waiting for the old man to reply. I was scared for him. After a few surges of static and several minutes, I finally got a reply. The old trucker seemed hushed and talked under his breath. Hey, I hope you're still there. I don't want to be a burden to you, but I'm not feeling all that safe out here. Do you think you could pull up a map or something to get me out of here? I'll have to leave my trailer behind, but my job ain't worth my life. The faint sound of static hauntingly trailed off of his words. I felt bad for the man. Something out there was really setting him off. Hey, yeah, sure. If you can make it to my front door, I'll let you in. I'm just around the corner from the highway. You're a real lifesaver. Just give me a second. I'll get out my mobile radio and you can leave me there. I bit my cheek anxiously. I had no idea if what I was doing was right or even safe for that matter, but he needed help and I didn't want to turn him away. All right, I'm opening up my truck, he called in, his voice distorted heavily by static. The fog must have made the transmission come in broken, I reasoned to myself. Let me know when you hit a sign. I'll tell you where to go from there. A few seconds passed before he responded again. Willard Street, his voice crackled in. Take a right down that road and keep going until you hit an intersection. A few more seconds passed. Johnson and Avery, the voice remarked. I felt confused. He would have to be sprinting to have made it that quickly to the next sign. Are you all right? Do you need me to call someone? The radio echoed my voice back to me, muffled and contorted before I got a response from the man. No, I just want to get out of this fog. The trucker's voice repeated a few times before breaking apart into static. All right, then take Avery all the way down, I replied. I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Something about this wasn't right, and I wasn't dumb. My neighbor directly across my street was a police captain. I figured if I sent the old man there, he could get the help he needed, and I could pass it off as a mistake with my mental directions if asked. Tucker Court, the man reverberated in with a static. Let's see. Walk 3 houses down, and my place should be on the left. I closed my eyes tightly, my forehead scrunched up in worry. I prayed this would work out for the best. I'm outside, the old trucker chortled while different pitches of his voice all resonated nearly at the same time repeating themselves. I put the mic to my mouth to tell him to knock, but couldn't muster up the courage. I set the radio down and turned it off. I looked over my shoulder to my attic window. I took a deep breath and released it before deciding to take a gander. I wasn't expecting to see much. I mean, how could I? The fog covered everything. But I looked anyway. I got out of my chair and crept towards the window. I placed my hand on the wooden frame surrounding the glass and took a deep breath, conjuring up my courage. I slowly grabbed the curtain and very gently pushed him to the side. allowing just enough space for my eye to peek through. I know you want answers as to who or what was out there, but the fog was too strong. Nothing but whiteness exposed itself to me visually, but physically, emotionally, I felt it out there. I can only describe it as dread incarnate. It was a visceral, primal feeling that washed over me, stronger than anything else I've ever felt. I knew someone or something was out there, and it wasn't natural. It had a goal, an indecipherable, incomprehensible goal, and that goal led nowhere good. I could feel the sense of death creep into my bones, locking my joints in place. My body was stiffening for a quick end. As that feeling burned its way into my memories, I forced myself to have the courage to run away from that window. I turned my back towards the fog behind me and ran for my stairs. I ran on instinct. I felt my feet land on my lower floor and let myself be guided toward the only place in my home where I couldn't see into that mist, my windowless closet. I jumped inside and slammed the door behind me. I remember sitting in that closet for hours, staring off into the darkness, praying and hoping. I imagined the feeling. I stayed up all night until I could see the sun filter in from under my closet door. I exited my safe haven and crawled to a window before I peered outside. I felt my mouth gape open when I saw my neighbor's attic window broken into. No marks on the walls of the house gave any sort of hint as to how whatever it was had climbed inside. I instinctively called the police, and they responded with haste. After all, my neighbor was one of them. They took me in and refused to tell me what they found inside. Even afterwards, the newspapers had nearly no information regarding the crime. The most I gathered was that my neighbor's family was murdered in their home while they slept. Him, his wife, and his 2 children all gone. Those lives were extinguished because of me. Though that wasn't all that happened that night. There was another murder that also happened on the highway. An old trucker named Gale. Unlike the captain and his wife, Gale's death was listed as an animal attack and was separate from the murder investigation. They claimed he parked too close to the woods and a bear must have wandered up to his door. They said they don't know what possessed him to open his door, but that had to have been when the bear got inside. He was mauled to death, but that so-called bear ripped his head from his shoulders and took it off into the woods. They never found it. But we know differently, or at least I do. That wasn't a freak accident. Something's out there just waiting for directions.